Imagine stepping into a restaurant, ready for a relaxing meal, only to be met with immediate judgment and disdain. What if a snap decision by one person, based purely on appearances, could unravel an entire evening and expose a deeper truth about respect and assumptions? This is the story of Jasmine Crockett, whose quiet dinner out turned into an unexpected lesson in dignity, ownership, and the power of silent strength. She told Jasmine, "I don't serve poor people," without asking her name, her reservation, or her story. What she didn't know was Jasmine's husband owned the entire restaurant. Jasmine Crockett wasn't in the mood for glamour. It had been a long week of meetings, court filings, and nonstop emails. So when her friends Teresa and Monique suggested dinner at this new spot in Santa Rosa called Olive Grove and Vine, she didn't overthink it. Black jeans, a soft cream sweater, clean white sneakers, simple and effortless. She let her thick curls hang loose, added a touch of gloss, and called it good. "I heard it's fancy," Monique had said on the phone, "but not too fancy. You'll be fine." So Jasmine didn't expect to walk into a storm of judgment the moment she stepped into the restaurant. The place was sleek, but not stiff. A few couples near the windows, a family with older kids tucked into a corner booth. The bar had a soft hum of conversation, nothing too noisy, but just enough to feel alive. The hostess stand stood empty, so the three women waited. Jasmine stood a little behind the others, scrolling casually through her phone. Then came the footsteps. A young waitress, maybe mid-20s, strode up from the left. Her hair was pulled tight into a high ponytail. Full face of makeup, glossy lips. She held a small notepad, but she wasn't writing anything. She looked directly at Jasmine first, then at the other two. Her eyes narrowed slightly, her smile tight, forced. "You ladies have a reservation?" she asked, voice crisp. "We do," Teresa replied, glancing up. "Crockett, party of three." The waitress didn't even glance at the tablet in her hand. "Well," she said, her tone sharpening, "we've got a dress code. No athletic shoes and no hoodies." Jasmine glanced down at her sneakers. Clean, plain, not flashy. "Montag nie was vielen flats." Teresa had on boots. "No hoodies in sight." "I don't think any of us are in violation," Monique said with a polite smile. But the waitress wasn't smiling anymore. "You sure about that?" she said, looking directly at Jasmine again. "I don't serve poor people. You need to leave." The words were quick, flat, delivered like a warning. For a split second, the restaurant went quiet. Conversations near the bar slowed. A couple at the corner table looked over. Jasmine didn't flinch. Her eyes lifted slowly and met the waitress's, calm, focused. No reaction, just a slight lift of the brow. Teresa blinked. "Excuse me, what did you just say?" "You heard me," the waitress replied, brushing a loose strand of hair back behind her ear. "She doesn't belong here." Monique turned fully to face the woman, eyes wide. "Is this a joke?" Jasmine didn't move. She didn't speak. Not yet. She let the silence work. There was no yelling, no scene, just the weight of it all pressing down. And the waitress, she was clearly convinced she held the upper hand. But just behind them, near the glass doors, someone had been watching. Christopher Crockett hadn't walked in with Jasmine. He'd parked the car, taken a quick phone call, then followed a few minutes later. He wasn't flashy either. Dark blazer, gray jeans, subtle Rolex, but nothing screaming status. He watched the entire exchange from near the entrance, leaned slightly to the side, eyes locked on his wife, not on the waitress. He waited because he knew Jasmine. She didn't react just to make a point. She never needed to perform. When something bothered her, she let the silence stretch, let the moment cook just long enough. That's when Christopher stepped forward. Still unnoticed by the waitress, he walked up and gently placed a hand on Jasmine's back. "Everything all right here?" he asked, eyes on his wife. The waitress turned, saw him for the first time, and smiled, instantly more relaxed. She assumed he was just another customer, maybe even a manager. Certainly not someone connected to her. Jasmine smiled too, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Oh," she said softly, "I was just being told I don't belong." But Christopher didn't blink. He knew exactly what to do next. The waitress blinked as if Jasmine's words hadn't quite landed. Christopher didn't take his eyes off her. Is that what she said? Teresa stepped in before Jasmine could reply. She told Jasmine, and I quote, "I don't serve poor people. You need to leave." That's what just happened, right in front of everyone. The waitress took a step back, arms folding tightly across her chest. "Look, I'm not trying to be rude, all right? We try to keep a certain atmosphere here." And Monique let out a short laugh, sharp bitter. "Atmosphere," she echoed. "Lady, this isn't a country club. It's a restaurant in a strip mall next to a dry cleaner." Now, people were really paying attention. A man at the bar whispered something to his wife. A younger couple 2 tables over stopped eating, eyes darting between the waitress and Jasmine. The vibe had changed, and the waitress felt it. "I just thought she might be, lost," the waitress muttered, eyes flicking to Jasmine's sneakers like they were a felony. Christopher's voice cut through, calm but unmistakably firm. She wasn't lost. She was here on time for a reservation, same as everyone else. The waitress hesitated, now visibly uneasy. "I just meant, she doesn't look like the kind of people we usually get in here." Jasmine tilted her head, arms folded lightly in front of her. Her voice was soft, but each word landed like it was carved from stone. "You mean the kind who don't scream money when they walk in? Or the kind who don't need to?" I got a few quiet nods from nearby tables. Someone near the bar even murmured, "Exactly." Still, the waitress didn't back down. "I'm just doing my job. You all are making a big deal out of nothing." "No." Teresa shot back. "You did that the moment you opened your mouth." At that point, another employee, an older man with a salt and pepper beard and a calm, measured energy, came out from the back. He looked like a manager. His badge read Edgar. He approached the group slowly, trying to read the tension before jumping in. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, his voice polite but alert. Christopher nodded. "Yeah, we're still trying to figure out if this place has a problem with class or just a problem with manners." The waitress quickly turned to Edgar, voice pitched high and defensive. "They're twisting what I said. I was just explaining our policies." Edgar gave her a long look. "Our policy doesn't include throwing out guests who arrive on time, dressed appropriately, and holding a reservation." Then he turned to Jasmine. "I am sorry. Truly." Before Jasmine could reply, Christopher extended a hand to Edgar. Christopher Crockett." The manager shook it instinctively. Then Christopher added, "I finalized the acquisition papers for this location 3 weeks ago. I've been working with the former owner for months." Edgar's face changed in an instant. He stammered, catching himself. "You're the new investor." Jasmine's eyes didn't leave the waitress. "The one who doesn't belong," she said softly. Silence returned, and then, as if the tension had a physical weight, it sank heavily on the waitress's shoulders. Her face drained of color. Her voice, so bold just moments ago, now barely surfaced. I didn't know," she stuttered. Christopher nodded slowly. "That much is clear. But he wasn't here for revenge. He was here to make a point, quietly, clearly, and without ever raising his voice." The silence around the table stretched, but it wasn't awkward. It was full of realization, of embarrassment, of clarity, the kind that makes people shift in their seats and rethink the last 5 minutes of their life. Christopher didn't rush the moment. He'd learned that over the years, sometimes silence does what shouting never could. The waitress kept looking back and forth between him and Edgar, waiting for someone, anyone, to save her. I've only been here 2 months, she said, reaching for something to justify herself. Nobody told me anything about new ownership. Jasmine exhaled softly through her nose. You didn't need to know who he was. You just needed to treat people like human beings. The line hit hard. A woman sitting 2 tables away lowered her fork and gave Jasmine the slightest respectful nod, but the waitress still wasn't finished trying to explain. Look, I get it now, but people come in here trying to scam tables, or they don't tip, or they... Christopher cut her off, not with anger, but with clarity. That still wouldn't justify what you said. Not ever. You didn't even give us a chance to sit down. He turned to Edgar. I'd like to speak with you and the head chef in the office. Jasmine and her friends will wait here. Let's make sure their table's ready. Edgar nodded quickly. Yes, of course. The waitress tried to speak again, but Edgar stopped her with a quiet, not now. His voice wasn't harsh, just final. Christopher leaned into Jasmine for a second and gently kissed her temple. "You okay?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm fine," she said, brushing her fingertips across his wrist. She's the one who should be asking herself that question. Teresa and Monique exchanged glances, still stunned, but impressed at how it was all playing out. As the three women were escorted to a booth near the front, fresh linen, clean silverware, and 3 glasses of water already waiting. Conversations around them slowly resumed, though everyone still kept an ear open. Something real had just happened. People could feel it. A manager's action. Back in the office, Edgar and Christopher sat down, the head chef joining them a minute later, a tall, soft-spoken man named Jamari with flowers still on his sleeves. "Sorry you had to walk into that," Jamari said first. "It's not about me," Christopher replied. "It's about the kind of energy you want this place to have." Edgar nodded. "We train our staff, but not everyone listens." Christopher sat back in his chair. She didn't just break a rule. She showed who she is when no one was watching. That's the real problem. The room was quiet for a beat. Jamari finally spoke. "She can go tonight." Christopher looked at him, then at Edgar. "Not for me. Not because she embarrassed my wife, but because she showed every customer here that her respect is conditional. If you keep her, you're sending a message." Edgar nodded slowly. "I'll handle it." Meanwhile, at the booth, Jasmine stirred her water with the straw. Her voice stayed low just for the three of them. "She saw my skin, my shoes, and decided who I was." And Monique shook her head. She didn't even blink when she said it, like it was normal, like she'd said it before. Teresa added. Jasmine smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind that comes from knowing exactly who you are. "I've spent years earning rooms like this, but the truth is I shouldn't have to earn basic decency." But even as they waited for their meals, the real impact of that moment was still taking shape. Back in the office, Edgar took a deep breath. He didn't look forward to these moments. No manager did, but sometimes leadership meant discomfort. Christopher stayed quiet, letting the weight of the decision settle. "I'll walk her out myself," Edgar said after a pause. "And I'll speak to the rest of the staff. This won't be ignored." Christopher stood. "Appreciate that." As Edgar left to find the waitress, Jamari turned to Christopher. "Just so you know, my kitchen doesn't play those games. Everyone eats the same." Christopher's expression softened. That's all I needed to hear. Back on the floor, Edgar found the waitress near the service station, arms folded, clearly tense. A few of the servers nearby were already whispering. Word had traveled. It always did. "I need to talk to you in the office," he said simply. Her lips parted slightly like she might argue, but then closed again. She followed him without a word. At the front booth, Jasmine's dinner had just arrived, pan-seared halibut with herb couscous. And Monique had ordered duck confit, and Teresa went with pasta primavera. The food looked incredible, but the energy around the table was heavier than before. And Monique took a bite, chewed slowly. "Still feels weird, right?" Jasmine nodded. "Yeah, like I know it's being handled, but I keep thinking about how quickly it happened. Like it wasn't personal to her. It was automatic." Teresa looked over her glass. And how many other people just let it happen and go home feeling like they didn't belong? The question hung there for a second. They didn't answer it because they already knew. 10 minutes later, Christopher returned to the table. He looked calm, controlled, but Jasmine knew him well enough to see the storm just under the surface. "She's gone," he said simply. "What did she say?" And Monique asked. "Didn't say much," Christopher replied, "but she'll have time to think about it." He glanced around the restaurant. A few diners looked up and nodded at him. Nothing big, but subtle signs of support. Respect. Some of them had been silent witnesses to the whole thing. Christopher sat down and reached for his water. "Manager's solid, chef too. I think we've got good people here. We just had a bad one wearing the apron." Jasmine picked up her fork. "Funny how people assume you're not important when you don't walk in making noise." Teresa leaned back. "Honestly, you didn't have to say a word." And she buried herself. Jasmine looked at her friends. "Yeah, but that's part of the problem. I'm used to this kind of thing not shocking me anymore, and that's exhausting." Christopher gently tapped his glass against hers. "Then maybe it's time we start showing people that we don't need to yell to be heard." For a while, they just ate. No heavy talk, no rehashing, just good food and the occasional quiet laugh. Then Edgar approached the table again, slower this time, less formal. I just wanted to say again, I'm sorry, truly, he said. And thank you for how you handled it. We've had complaints before. Nothing that blatant, but, close enough. I didn't see it for what it was until now. Jasmine looked him in the eye, then learned from it. Teach your team. You don't get a pass because you weren't looking. The damage was still done. Edgar nodded, face tight with emotion. You're right. Also, Jasmine added, her voice measured, make sure your next hire doesn't carry the kind of baggage behind their smile. He nodded again, then walked away quietly. But even with the incident behind them, there was still one conversation that hadn't happened yet. The one that would turn a personal moment into something much larger. After dessert, 3 shared plates of lemon tarts, espresso chocolate bites, and a warm pear cobbler. Jasmine excused herself from the table, not to leave, but to speak to the kitchen staff. She didn't want a speech. She didn't want to make a scene. She wanted the people who worked in the back, the ones who hadn't seen what happened at the front of the house, to understand why it mattered. Christopher stayed behind, letting her go alone. That was Jasmine's way. Not about ego, not about headlines. She just believed that if someone had something worth saying, they could say it without a mic. She knocked once on the swinging kitchen door, then slipped inside. The room smelled of garlic, onions, butter. Flames flared from the stovetop. Pans clattered. It was organized chaos, like any real kitchen at dinner time. A few heads, turned then, returned to their stations. Only Jamari looked up and stepped forward. You good? He asked. I am, Jasmine said, but I need to borrow a minute for the whole crew. He didn't ask why. He raised his hand, let out one low whistle, and just like that, the clatter slowed. Someone turned down a burner. A younger line cook stepped away from the fryer. Even the dishwasher peeked his head around the corner. Hi, Jasmine began. I know most of you didn't see what happened earlier, but I want you to hear something straight from me. The room quieted, not out of obligation, but interest. They could tell it wasn't a complaint. She wasn't here to point fingers. A server took one look at me tonight and decided I didn't belong here, she said, calm but clear. No questions, no conversation, just judgment. She saw my clothes, my skin, my face, and assumed she had me figured out. Someone let out a slow breath. Jamari's brow furrowed. Jasmine didn't pause. She didn't ask about my reservation. She didn't ask my name. She didn't treat me like a guest. She treated me like a problem. And before she even knew who I was, she told me to leave. Nobody spoke. Even the stove timers felt muted in that moment. I'm not telling you this because I want you to feel bad. I'm telling you because it's a reminder that how we treat people matters. Whether they wear designer shoes or scuffed up sneakers, whether they own the building or just came in for a salad. She took a slow breath, not to collect herself, but to let the moment land. Some people think respect is something you earn. I disagree. I think it's something you give right away. And if someone proves they don't deserve it, then you pull it back, not the other way around. A younger sous chef, probably in his early 20s, shifted on his feet and spoke up. I worked places where that kind of thing happened all the time. Nobody ever said anything. Jasmine looked at him. Then it's time we stopped staying quiet. Jamari nodded. You got that right. Another voice chimed in from the back, an older prep cook who'd been listening while chopping parsley. You handled it better than most would have. Some folks come in here acting like they're royalty and still get treated better than you did. Jasmine offered a small, tired smile. Yeah, that's why it stings, but it's also why I came back here, because I know most of you wouldn't have treated me that way. She let that sit for a beat, then added, what happens up front reflects on everybody, but what you do back here, this work, this energy, it matters just as much. Jamari walked her back to the door. Respect, Mrs. Crockett, he said. Not because your name's on the paperwork, but because of how you walked in here tonight. Thank you, she replied. But while Jasmine left the kitchen with a bit more peace, the story wasn't quite done yet. Not until the entire night found its closing note. As Jasmine returned to the dining area, the room had shifted again, but in a different way. The tension from earlier had given way to something quieter, more thoughtful. Customers who had only watched now looked up and offered kind nods, small smiles, little acknowledgments of what they'd witnessed. No one clapped. No one made a scene. But something had changed. Teresa was finishing her coffee, and Monique was mid-conversation with Christopher about local jazz clubs in Oakland. Jasmine slid back in her seat, eyes scanning the room, noticing how people now looked at her with something closer to respect than curiosity. Christopher leaned toward her. "All good." She nodded. They listened. "That's all I wanted." Across the room, Edgar returned once more, walking, this time with a slower step, like the weight of the evening had finally caught up to him. He stopped a few feet from their table. "I just want to let you know," he began, voice quiet but firm, "we'll be conducting a full staff meeting first thing in the morning. No shortcuts, no excuses. I'll be talking to corporate about mandatory anti-bias training, too. We're not letting this fade." And Monique looked up at him, arms crossed. "Let's hope not." Edgar nodded. "I deserve that." He reached into his pocket and laid a small card on the edge of the table. "And your next visit is on the house, entirely for all three of you." Jasmine didn't reach for the card. "I appreciate the gesture," she said, "but we don't need free food. We needed you to listen." Edgar held her gaze for a second, then slowly picked the card back up. "Understood. What you can do," Jasmine added, "is hire people who look like your guests, so when a black woman walks through that door, she's not automatically seen as less." He didn't argue. He simply nodded again and left them to finish their night. By the time the check came, paid in full by Christopher, as quietly as everything else he'd done, the energy in the room had softened. Not erased, not fixed, but shifted. As they stood to leave, a woman from the table near the bar reached out to Jasmine. "I saw everything," she said gently. "Just wanted to say, you handled that with more grace than I would have." Jasmine smiled, just barely. "I've had practice." Outside, the evening air had cooled, but not enough to need jackets. The sky was dark, the lot lit by yellow street lamps, and the only sound was the crunch of tires pulling out one by one. Christopher opened the passenger door for her, then walked around to his side. Before they drove off, Jasmine sat for a second, hands folded in her lap. "Do you think anything really changes?" she asked him. He looked over. "Tonight, I think I already did. Might not fix everything, but somebody in there's going to think twice before they speak next time." She gave a small nod, not out of satisfaction, but out of cautious hope. Back inside, Edgar stood at the window, watching their car disappear beyond the edge of the lot. Behind him, Jamari was wiping down counters, prepping for tomorrow. "That woman," Edgar said quietly. She didn't even raise her voice, but she said more than I've heard in years. Jamari didn't look up. "That's what real people do. They don't need noise. They just need a reason." But Jasmine and Christopher weren't done just yet. Their final words to the staff would stay with everyone far longer than any policy or punishment ever could. The next morning came early for the staff at Olive Grove and Vine. No jazz music on the speakers. No breakfast prep yet. Just the hush of employees gathered near the back wall of the dining area, arms crossed, faces still processing what had unfolded the night before. Edgar stood in front of them, holding a folder he hadn't opened yet. Beside him stood Jasmine and Christopher Crockett. Jasmine hadn't planned on coming back, but after she and Christopher talked late into the night, they both agreed. Leaving people to guess what the lesson was would be a missed opportunity. So, here they were. No camera crew, no lawyer, just two people who had something to say, in a room full of people ready, or at least willing, to hear it. Jasmine spoke first. "I'm not here to embarrass anyone. I'm not here to rehash everything that happened. You already know." A few heads lowered slightly. A server near the back shifted awkwardly. "What I want to say is this," she continued. "That moment, it wasn't really about me. Not just me. It was about every person who walks into this restaurant and gets sized up before they even say a word. Every person who gets a fake smile or no smile at all based on how they look or what they wear or who you think they are." Christopher stepped forward beside her. "When I bought into this place," he said, "it was because I believed in what it could be. A place that welcomed everyone. Families, couples, travelers, students, retirees. But none of that matters if the people standing here," he motioned gently around the room, "don't carry that same belief." No one argued. They didn't need to. The air was full of unspoken acknowledgement. "Respect has to be the baseline," Jasmine added. "Not the bonus," not the reward for looking a certain way. The baseline. That's how you build a business. People want to come back. Jamari, standing near the kitchen door, gave a small nod. He didn't need convincing, but some of the younger staff, those who hadn't even seen the incident, were clearly seeing things differently now. A server near the front raised her hand a little. "Can I ask something?" Jasmine turned to her, open and calm. "Of course, what if we get it wrong sometimes? Like, not with that kind of attitude, but just unconscious stuff. We're human." Jasmine smiled softly. "Then you own it. You check yourself. You apologize when needed. You listen when someone calls it out. No one's asking for perfection, just effort and honesty." The girl nodded, slowly lowering her hand. Christopher added, "And if you see a coworker treating someone badly, don't wait for management. Step in. Culture isn't built from the top down. It's built from the middle out." There was a beat of silence, the kind that meant something had finally landed. Jasmine stepped back beside her husband. "We don't expect to walk in here and see plaques on the wall with our names. That's not the point. What matters is that when the next woman walks through that door looking like me, dressed down, hair natural, you treat her like a paying guest, like a person." She paused, then added, "Because you never know who's walking in, but that shouldn't be the reason you treat them right. You should treat them right because it's the right thing to do." With that, she thanked them and turned toward the door. Christopher followed. As they reached the exit, Edgar called out gently, "Mrs. Crockett." She stopped and turned. "I hope this place becomes what you pictured when you bought in," he said. She gave a small nod. "That depends on what happens after we leave." They stepped out into the sunlight, quiet and composed. No dramatics, no victory lap, just a sense of peace that only comes when you've said what needed to be said. Back inside, the staff remained still for a moment. Then Jamari picked up a notepad and said to the younger server near him, "All right, let's go and make it a better day." And sometimes that's how real change starts. Not with a bang, but with people deciding to be better when no one's watching. This story isn't just about a rude waitress. It's a powerful reminder of how quickly prejudice and assumptions can manifest and cause harm. It highlights the importance of basic human decency regardless of appearance or perceived status. We learn that true respect is a baseline, not a reward, and that fostering a culture of empathy and inclusion requires conscious effort from everyone, not just management. It also demonstrates the quiet strength of responding with dignity and clear communication, rather than reacting with anger to effect genuine change.